Welcome back to the Tinker Shed, everybody. Today I'm going to continue my work on this BAJA DR50 Dirt Runner mini bike. I'm going to be fixing the plastics and polishing them up to make them look nice, but I also have a little bit of work on the seat and the seat pan itself. So why don't you sit back and grab yourself something cold to drink and enjoy Dino's Tinker Shed. This ought to be good. Now the plastics on this bike were in pretty rough shape when they were delivered to me. Now the front fender and the fuel tank were actually in pretty good condition. They just needed a little bit of cleaning up. But the rear fender and side panel assembly had been broken into 3 individual pieces. So the 2 side panels and the rear fender had been snapped right off of the bike. So the first thing we need to do is actually figure out how to reconnect these pieces so they're functional again and get them back onto the bike. All right, let's get going on that right now. There are really a lot of ways to connect broken plastics together. You can glue them or you can use zip ties and stitch it. I'm going to try to plastic weld this using this black filler rod and just general welding techniques. So how I do this is I use a spade-shaped bit in my soldering iron, and I also use this filler rod. I believe this is PA filler rod. I think it's the same base plastic. It seems to work, but I could be wrong, obviously. But you take this spade-shaped bit and you work it across the seam in small 1mm steps. So you push the spade bit into the base material, and then you walk it back about 1 millimeter and then push it back in again. And this blends and melts and bonds the plastic all the way along the seam. Now, once you get a little section done, you can come back in and use the spade bit more like a spatula. And you can spread that material and push it back up onto the seam and fill in the gap and blend all of that plastic to make it one homogeneous area. And it actually is quite strong. Now it does take some time to do this and it's not the prettiest, but I do think it looks better than zip tie stitching. Now when you're done on the one side, flip it over and do the exact same thing, pushing the spade bit halfway into the base material. So now you've basically melted that seam all the way through. Now because this is the bottom, I'm going to use a little bit of filler rod here. I just cut a chunk off and then using the spade bit, I melt it down and blend it with the base material the best that I can. And it does seem to work pretty good, so I think I have the right actual plastic fill. I'll grind it down when I'm done, just to smooth it out. And I'll follow the whole process up with a little plastic polish, just to give the side panels and the fenders and stuff a good look. And you can see I'm pretty aggressive here with this plastic polish. And none of my seams broke or even cracked after I had welded them, so I was pretty pleased with that. So I'll switch over and start polishing up the tank as well. I do the front fender, it's a little off camera there, but one thing you need to realize about this plastic polish is it does take off all the corrosion and the oxidization on the tank, but because the tank is exposed to gasoline, it's always going to be a little bit different color than the rest of the plastics, and you're just going to have to accept that. If you remember, we built this seat brace in the last video and we're going to use it to hold the fender and seat in place. So when I place this part of the fender on, I'm just sort of setting this up. So this will be here. This will be here. What I'm thinking maybe is I can put a piece of rubber along here and stitch this together with rivets. But I don't need these parts here. So I might actually trim these off. I think it'll look better. And then the rubber will actually give a little bit of strength in here and should help some support. But I'm impressed at how strong that plastic welding actually works. It's a little bit ugly, but I think it'll actually work pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna actually fasten this down then, and I'm gonna start working on this rubber piece here. Well, I think I will use the same type of rubber or similar type of rubber that I have on my workbench here. This stuff's really flexible and really strong, and I've got a whole roll of this. So I should be able to cut out sort of that support strap to go between the two pieces and make it work pretty good. Okay, let's get that done. So I'm thinking something would fit in there maybe like this, maybe. You know what I mean? And I could fasten the fender back down onto this piece here. Or do I make it wider? Maybe wider's better. Then I can put a couple fasteners in all the way along there. But it needs to be a little wider than this. So I think, why don't I cut a piece that's 4.5 by 4? I think that'll work. So that'll fit in like that, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple rivets in here just to hold it, and then this side here I'll cut once it's onto the bike. I'll fasten this one, line all this up, figure it out, and then drill the holes. Let's start by punching some holes in for this. Now for this I'm just going to use one of these center punches here. These hollow punches are the same diameter as the rivet head. Let me just get a hammer. I don't really think it matters too much where these go because I'm going to transfer the holes over. There we go, one. Like that. Then I can transfer these onto this guy with a marker. Now I want to show you one of my favorite tools for riveting. So these are what are called clecos, and these are used in aircraft construction. And they come with a special wrench. They're just being stored here, but basically the way these work is they have an expanding head here that fits through your rivet hole and temporarily holds your riveted pieces in place until you can get the rivets in. It's basically like a third hand. So I'm going to put this on here and then we'll put some rivets in. So I'm going to line these up underneath. Find the first one here, there it is. And this is where these clecos are really handy. I don't know how well it's going to work with rubber like this, but they do work really well for aluminum and steel. Let me just see here. I have a feeling they're going to not quite be as good, but we're going to try them. All right, now I'm going to start riveting on this fourth one over here. Now, if you've never used a rivet gun before, they're pretty simple. They have interchangeable heads here that allow different diameter shafts to be used for the rivets, but for this one I'm using 3/16 rivets. Oh. So they basically just slide in like that. Now I'm going to use a backer washer underneath the rubber, but basically when you squeeze the handle over here, it actually expands the end of the rivet, as you can see there, and deforms it so it can't pull back out. Eventually, it pulls the little head right off and you end up with a little stud like that. So these come in different lengths and different diameters, but let's try this. So I am going to start by putting the rivet through the hole here and then through the rubber. And then I'm going to put that washer on the bottom and I'm going to tuck it up as tight as I can to the rubber. There we go, and we're going to see how this works. Hopefully it doesn't crack the plastic that we just glued or welded or whatever you want to call it. There we go. Look at that. It worked pretty good. And now we can come in and take out our clecos and work our way around. Look pretty good. Nice and clean. I do think I'm going to trim these off here though. I'll do that right now. I'm going to mark the little bits that I want to cut off the side panels here with this Sharpie marker. And then I'm going to use my angle grinder with just a regular cutoff disc to trim the excess material off the side panels. And I can even use this to dress the edges so they're nice and round and smooth. Once that's complete, I'm going to dry fit the assembly onto the motorcycle so I can get an idea of where the rear fender is going to sit in relation to these side panels. This rubber is a little bit long, so I'll use my Sharpie marker again, and I'll make just a little line across here to cut. And it cuts easy enough just with a regular old pair of scissors. Once I lay the fender on and get the gap that I like, I'll mark 4 evenly spaced dots along the fender, set in about 10 millimeters or about a half an inch from the cut edge. I don't want to get it too close because it could risk cracking it when I actually tighten up the rivets. And to stop any cracking, I'll use a small pilot drill here to drill out these holes and get it ready. And I'll follow this up with the final size drill bit for the rivet shaft. Once this is complete, I'll take the fender back over to the motorcycle and I'll reach through with my Sharpie marker and actually mark off the rubber so I know where to transfer the holes to. And I'll follow this up with our hollow pointed punch just to knock these holes into the rubber itself. Next, it's cleco time. So I'll fit the fender back up with my clecos in preparation for riveting it to the rubber itself. And now it's just a matter of going back and actually attaching the rear fender to the rubber with the rivets. Finally, we get to put the completed assembly back onto the motorcycle. And I'll attach it permanently up front here with this small 10mm headed bolt. The rear part really gets fastened down with the seat itself with the pair of studs that are in the seat pan, so we'll do that later. But while I'm at it, I think I'm going to attach the front fender just to see how it looks, and I think it looks pretty good. It cleaned up really well, but you can see that color contrast between the fender plastic and the tank plastic right now. It's quite a bit darker. It still looks pretty good in person, but the camera doesn't do it any justice. But I think it's still going to be okay. Well, this is the next step in the process here, the seat. Now overall, the seat's in pretty decent shape, although it does have some damage at the back here, where the seat's been torn, and the seat pan's been damaged. You can see someone's used probably JB Weld here to try and weld this back together. But probably, again, this was probably a heavier rider like myself, and they destroyed this. So we're going to fiberglass this and see if we can't reinforce this seat pan enough to make it structurally sound. The damage on the end will probably just be black duct tape just to fix it up. I don't have a seat cover. I can buy a new seat. They're about $30, but what the heck? I don't think I need to. But you can see at the front here too, this has been created. This is definitely not factory. This little stinger here, someone's welded this up and bent it. They didn't do a bad job. I'm just going to leave that. I think it'll work out fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull all the staples out here and then assess what I have. I'll probably put a few small screws in here to maybe grab the fiberglass, or maybe not. I might just grind this a little bit just to give it some mechanical adhesion. I'll pull all these staples out, fold this back, and then fit a couple pieces of fiberglass over top of these studs. And hopefully that'll be enough to hold it. Okay, let's get to work. Staples can be very challenging to get out of these plastic seat pans, so I'll use a small screwdriver here and some side cutters and pliers to pull out as many of these staples as I can and get the area prepared. I'll fold back the fabric, and you can kind of see right here the one plastic stud is snapped right off of the seat pan, and this is probably the most challenging part of this repair. Once I free it up, I realize the JB weld's a little too thick for it to fit flat against the seat pan again. So I'm going to have to break out my Dremel tool and sort of clean up the edges and knock as much of that JB weld off as I can so that the stud will fit back into the seat pan smoothly. Now it takes a little bit of time to do, and I feel a little bit like a dentist, but eventually I do get it to fit smoothly, or at least smoothly enough that I think I can get the fiberglass to hold it in place. Now finally what I'll do is I'll take my Rotolock tool and I'll just surface all of the plastic so that the fiberglass has something to grab when I apply it. I am going to use fairly thick and aggressive fiberglass mat in here, and I'll run this all the way up. I cut a couple holes for the bolts to poke through here, like that, and I'm going to tape these bolt holes up. I'll probably put a couple layers on just to try and strengthen it as much as I can. This is going to be, I'm going to say, a little bit of a hack job. It's not going to be really great. I'm hoping I can get it so that it's structurally stable. That's really what I'm after here. To fasten our fiberglass down, we are going to use a combination of fiberglass resin and fiberglass hardener. Now there's a ratio for this that we're going to mix it at, but I'm going to put it into this paint tray. We're going to stir it up, and then we're going to paint it on with a combination of paint brushes and other tools. Alright, so let's dump a good gob of this in there. We're going to squeeze in some hardener. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to goober in like this and try to saturate the area. So there's a few things that I like to think about when I'm fiberglassing. I cut all of my sheets ahead of time so they fit in. You can see the first piece here goes right over the studs. And the key to good fiberglass is lots of resin. You want to make sure that you soak those mats thoroughly to the layer below them so that there's good adhesion and that the resin is well penetrated through the entire pieces. Now, I use a little spatula here just to push all the air bubbles out and to contour this as best I can to the seat pan below. And then all of those little pre-cut pieces that I have get layered on top of the ones below them. So I end up putting probably about 5 or 6 layers of this fiberglass matting in and around those bolts at the back to try and really strengthen up the seat pan where it is its weakest. So you just keep adding and saturating, and I never mix up more resin than I can really use in about a 20 to 30 minute time period. The last areas are right in behind the bolts here that I put in some narrow strips to give myself an area to staple to when I pull that seat cover back over. So I just keep adding and painting, and eventually you do get done. This took me, I think, around 25 minutes in total to actually get it completely saturated to a point that I was confident that it was good, but finally did get done. To reattach that seat fabric, I'm going to use this pneumatic T50 stapler that uses the same staples as a regular staple gun. I'll use some pliers to pull the fabric around and then just tack it all the way along the seam. Now, to address the tears in the back of the seat, I'm just going to use some heavy-duty black duct tape, and I'll wrap it all the way around the seat and stick it to the back of the seat cushion as if it was regular seat material. And you can see it looks pretty good. I'll follow this up by stapling it just as if it was regular seat fabric, and I think it's going to hold well. Now, to fasten the seat back onto the bike, I'm going to use 3 nuts in a shallow socket here. And the reason I do this is there's not a lot of stud length coming through that bracket that we built. So by doing this, I'll be able to push straight up on the socket and in turn grab those studs. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. The seat's in place and I'm just tightening it down. Let's have a look at that bike. I think we're done. That brings us to the end of today's episode. I had a great time working on this little bike and cleaning up the plastics. We repaired some of the broken areas and we also addressed the broken seat pan and the rear covering rips. I think it looks pretty good and I'm pretty confident that the seat itself is stronger now than it ever has been. In the next episode, I'm going to take you through how to tune the carburetor, adjust the clutch, and set up the brakes to make sure that this bike not only runs well, but is safe for the next little fella that happens to ride it. Until then, I hope that you get out into your shop or down into your basement and tinker on a project of your own. I'd love to hear about some of the things you're working on, so feel free to put them in the comments. For now, I'm Dino. I hope to see you soon stopping by Dino's Tinker Shed. Bye for now.